Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Afterglow. We're going to see how this one goes. I am using some new equipment right now. Picked up a Razer Siren X microphone. Previously to this, I've just been using the microphone built into my laptop, so hopefully we get some better audio quality out of this. Actually, I picked up a bunch of Razer goodies. I picked up a Razer Viper Ultimate mouse and a Razer V3 I believe it's the Black Widow Mini keyboard, and a Razer Goliathus mousepad, so RGB all over the place. But enough about that. Right now we're going to be checking out my first experience for the Sega Genesis with Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and we'll break into that after the music break. Alright, and welcome back. I will say that the soundtrack in this game is probably one of the best soundtracks that the Sega Genesis has to offer. But a lot of my initial history with the Sega Genesis is tied to this game. I had remembered, this is way back, we were living in that tiny town, Gleason at the time. Me and my dad were talking, and he's like, hey, they got both the new Nintendo and there's this other system called Sega out. He's like, which one, if you were to get one, which one would you prefer? And I had been reading some EGM at the time. My young self had. Oh my god, I must have been really, really young. Maybe 8, maybe 9. But I told him the Sega Genesis is more powerful. It's got a faster CPU, according to this magazine, which I'm pretty sure was Electronic Gaming Monthly. But I'm here like, if it's more powerful than the Super Nintendo, I think I'd rather have it. Now, hindsight being 2020, yes, the Sega Genesis did have a more powerful CPU than the Super Nintendo. That being said, though, the Super Nintendo obviously had the superior sound chip. At least I think so. A lot of people prefer the Genesis sound, that FM sound chip that was in there, but I really prefer the Sony chip in the Super Nintendo. And the Super Nintendo could also push a lot more colors on screen than the Sega Genesis at the end of the day. But, in my mind, more power equals prettier games. I'm here like, if I were to get one, I'd like the Sega Genesis. So Christmas came around, and I unwrapped a Sega Genesis with Sonic the Hedgehog 2 as the pack-in game. That being said, I really miss when consoles came with pack-in games. Nowadays, most new consoles don't come with a pack-in, and if there is a pack-in, it's actually like more expensive. I know that as of right now, there's a Diablo 4 edition of the Xbox Series X, and it's $560. But that being said, hooked the system up to my bedroom TV. At this point, I had a very small color TV in the bedroom, and I was blown away. Like, you put it in the game, and you get the Sega logo, but then the system, Sega, it does the Sega logo thing, and you're like, oh wow, that sounds so good compared to the voice samples on the NES, which for the most part were all like statically and crackling. Then the game starts up, you get the title screen, and you got that wild-looking parallax scrolling in the background that really catches your eye. Along with the intro jingle, which is really good. And then you start the game up, and again, I was blown away by that intro soundtrack of the Emerald Hill Zone. I was blown away by how the trees looked. Just the vividness of the colors on screen. It just screamed, man, this is next generation, you know? And the game is like, it's built perfectly as a pack-in game. Like, it is so good. And I know a lot of people will go back to Sonic 1 and they'll have the same thoughts. And I probably would have too if that were the pack-in game. But I started with Sonic 2 and man, it was mind-blowing. There's no other way to put it. And I believe the first time I played it, I got through Emerald Hill Zone and I struggled a little bit in the Chemical Plant Zone, which is the second level of the game. Grinded for a while, did eventually beat it, and for a while I didn't have like hardly any Sega games. This was like my only Sega game for the longest time until I want to say a couple months down the road, I had a relative get me, of all games, the Mickey Mouse game, which I think was more for my sister than it was for me, to be honest with you. And I judged that game so poorly. It ended up actually being a really good game, but honestly, you see a Mickey Mouse game and you're a preteen boy, you're on the cusp of your teenage years, it just, you're like, no. But Castle of Illusion, that was the name of the game. Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. It's actually a really good game. We might get an episode for it later. But for the longest time, I was all about Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And eventually I got a third game for the Genesis. It was used Street Fighter Champion Edition. And for the longest time, those were the only 3 games I had for the system. And something eventually happened to the Sega Genesis where I didn't have it anymore. Still had the games, and I think like it took a year or two for me to finally get another one. But during that time, I missed playing Sonic 2 so much. I mean, it didn't have the depth of Mario 3, and even as a kid, I knew that. Like, it was a more basic game, but it looked beautiful. And I just loved playing this game throughout the entirety of the lifetime of the Sega Genesis. I had brought up in the Sonic CD episode, I think that was episode 2, where I had bought a PC collection that was supposed to have the old Sonic the Hedgehog games on it, and then it didn't have the disc in it, so I couldn't play them again. I don't know if that technically counts as me buying a copy of the game again, but there it is. I couldn't play it. But I did eventually repurchase this game multiple times. I believe I got it on the Xbox 360 as part of the Sega Genesis collection. And then repurchased it again in a big collection of Sega Genesis stuff again on Steam. But it's one of those games that never gets old. But I'm going to gloss over those 2 purchases because the Android version that I purchased was amazing because it redid the game in 16:9 format, so it stretched out a bit. You can actually see a little bit more. And just that is really, really nice. But on top of that, there is a cut stage There's a mine level, but it has these pits, and if you fall in, you die. But there's, in the Android version, the remade version, there's one pit that you fall down. And what they did, they re-added a stage that was cut from the original game. And it has a completely new boss fight and everything in it. Now, to get here, you do end up skipping the boss fight for the cave stage. But the ability to have a whole new stage to play, a whole new boss to beat after, 20 some odd years, it was really awesome. But it's just one of those games that you cannot go wrong with. Like, even if you're like the biggest Nintendo fanboy out there, you gotta go back and at least play through some of the 2D Sonic games. And if you're only going to play one, it needs to be Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I know other people say Sonic 3 or Sonic and Knuckles or Sonic 3 and Knuckles with a lock-on. You gotta replay Sonic 2, though. Speaking of the lock-on, though, another kind of cool add-on that was done back in the Sega Genesis days was if you had a copy of Sonic and Knuckles, it had like a cartridge slot in the top of it. You could pop your copy of Sonic 2 in there, and then you could replay Sonic the Hedgehog 2 as Knuckles, which was really cool because he has that gliding ability. He can't jump really as high as Sonic, but he does have that glide, and he can climb walls. So it was a really cool way to breathe life into an old game without using like a Game Genie or something. And plus, like, you can do quite a bit with a Game Genie, but this actually gave you a whole new character to play as in the game. And it was really a window into modern day where you have DLC and whatnot. Like, you didn't see anything like this way back when. So it was a heck of a bonus to have. But with that being said, I'm going to probably close this one out. If you haven't played Sonic 2, go play it. Like, you're missing out on, like, one of the penultimate games for the Sega Genesis. If you have played it, but it's been a while, go back and play it again. It is such a good game. But I'm going to go ahead and close this episode on that. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.